Shalom. This week's Torah portion is Parashat Tazria, beginning in Leviticus chapter 12. What language does God speak? We know that language is the key to understanding and the foundation of all communication. So language is everything. Without the ability to understand a language, there can only be misunderstanding. It was the Austrian philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein that said, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." His comment reflects the idea held by some that if one cannot describe something in words, then it doesn't exist. You know what? In studying the book of Leviticus and its focus on the temple offerings, we begin to realize that this book is speaking in its own unique language. Thus, we are particularly challenged because in our milieu, in the world that we've been raised in, this language is not spoken. We're not attuned to hear this language. You know, there's such a thing as a lost language. The concept of a lost language can be understood both literally and metaphorically. When languages or modes of expression disappear or become inaccessible, the result is a loss of communication and understanding. Languages that are no longer spoken or understood represent a loss of cultural heritage and knowledge. But I'm now talking about something else. I'm relating to the concept metaphorically, and by lost language, I'm referring to ideas and a way of thinking that were once understood but have become obscure. So I propose to you that in order to truly understand our Torah portion, and indeed this entire book of Vayikra, we need to learn this language. Or rather, we need to relearn it. It's not like the experience of having to learn a new language from scratch. It's only on account of Israel's living of years in exile without the Holy Temple, which is itself an unnatural state of affairs, that's resulted in a disconnect from the spiritual meaning of these concepts, atrophying the nation's collective consciousness. But the deepest truths of the Torah are things that are not far from us, so it's not about learning a new language, but about trying to listen more attentively to a language we're hearing from a distance and reconnecting to an intuitive level of knowledge of something that's already inside of us, that's an integral part of us on a soul level. And though these ideas may sound unfamiliar to us today, in the time of the Holy Temple, they were self-evident, and they were an everyday matter of course that was literally understood by everybody from childhood and part of the routine of everyday life. So open up your heart. The language we are speaking of, the language that God speaks, is the language of holy. As elusive as we may find the concepts that we've learned thus far in the book of Leviticus to be, our portion now, Parashat Tazria, introduces ideas that are on such a completely different wavelength than we are normally attuned to that it will be very difficult for us. Parashat Tazria begins to introduce concepts that relate to the interaction between opposing worlds, the world of the material versus the world of the spirit. The arena in which these two worlds collide is in the life of man, and their manifestation is in the unique, fundamental laws that God gave to Israel, known as the laws of Tuma and tahara, generally referred to as biblical purity. Indeed, these words, Tuma and tahara, are commonly translated as impurity and purity, but they don't refer to anything connected to hygiene or any physical cleanliness or lack thereof. Actually, they describe states of spiritual health defined by God's Torah. One, tahara, being in spiritual alignment and balance, and the other, Tuma, the opposite. The laws of Tuma and tahara are complex, consisting of many levels and layers that need to be studied diligently, and a thorough discussion of their details is way outside the scope of a short presentation such as this. These laws fall under that category of ordinances known as chok, plural chukim, the divine decrees that were authored and declared by God, whose reasoning is not explained but accepted and obeyed faithfully, even though they are above and beyond the level of human comprehension. Now, a state of Tuma may be connected to death of a person or a creature. It can also be related to other circumstances related to the human body, such as the birth of a child, with which our portion opens in its very first verse, which raises such a huge question in our mind. Why should the bringing of a new life into the world, a birth, bring about a state of spiritual imbalance for the mother? We'll address that question soon. And then there is the Tuma, impurity brought on by the mysterious affliction of Tzarat, the major subject described in our portion, as well as in the following portion of Mitzorah. Now, as a general principle, as long as a state of Tuma is in effect, one is prevented from coming to the temple's sacred environs, or from touching or consuming anything designated as holy. and the manner in which a state of tahara, spiritual wellness, is reinstated as prescribed by Torah depends on the type of Tuma. As we said, these laws are divine decrees of the king. They're chukim, to be kept despite the fact that, unlike other commandments in Torah, these rules, God does not provide the reason for them. And while we accept this unknowability as a foundational element of our faith in Hashem and in His Torah, still we do know that on a symbolic and spiritual level of meaning, which our limited intellect can grasp, these laws of Tuma and tahara convey deep spiritual truths about the human condition and the nature of holiness and purity in man's life. An overview of some of this philosophical significance based on the perspective of some of our great sages opens broad vistas for our contemplation. Chassidut teaches that one way of understanding the state of Tuma is that of a spiritual obstacle that blocks or inhibits the flow of divine energy, while tahara is essentially the removal of these obstacles and thus the restoration of spiritual harmony. This perspective emphasizes the transformative power of spiritual purification and the potential for growth and renewal. The famous Rav, the great Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik, emphasizes the psychological and existential aspects of Tuma and tahara. He views Tuma as a state of existential loneliness and alienation, while tahara represents a state of connection and communion with God as well as with others. The laws of Tuma and tahara thus serve as a guide for navigating the human experience of existential tension and striving for spiritual fulfillment. The great Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch emphasizes that Tuma and tahara are not physical states, but spiritual ones, representing the distance or closeness of an individual to God. And in a similar vein, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs highlights the concept of Tuma as a form of spiritual contamination that results from actions that distance us from God and others. He sees the laws of Tuma and tahara as a divinely designed way to cultivate sensitivity to the effects of our actions on ourselves and on others. So open up your heart in the deepest way. What does that mean, to cultivate sensitivity? What does it really mean to be sensitive? So in the classic sense, the word sensitivity refers to the capacity to detect or respond to slight changes, signals, or influences in one's environment or within oneself. It involves being attuned to subtleties, nuances, and complexities in various aspects of life. Sensitivity can manifest in different forms: being aware of and responsive to one's physical surroundings, being aware and respectful of others and receptive to them and to their needs, being attuned to one's own emotions and being empathetic and understanding of the emotions of others, and being attuned to the spiritual or metaphysical aspects of life, such as being aware of the interconnectedness of all things, or being sensitive to the sacredness of certain places or times. These are all classic definitions, and these are all instances of sensitivity involving a heightened awareness and responsiveness to the world around us, enabling us to engage more deeply and more meaningfully with our environment and with our other people and with ourselves. So open up your heart deeper still. This is the great gift that the book of Leviticus bequeaths to us. It's an urging to attain and maintain a higher sensitivity to the sanctity of life. You know, today there's something called sensitivity training. It's also known as diversity training. Sensitivity training seeks to educate individuals about the challenges faced by people from different backgrounds. But the book of Leviticus is the original sensitivity training manual. Its laws emphasize compassion, empathy, and kindness towards others, stressing the sacred nature of interpersonal relationships and the divine obligation of ethical behavior and treating others with respect and dignity. Torah's goal is for us to have a constant, refreshing, renewing rendezvous with God, which is why it includes laws about caring for others as well as caring for the land and animals and the environment, because our relationship with the world around us flows from the awareness of the divine presence in all aspects of creation. So these states of Tuma and tahara are really about a person's relationship with and place among all of creation. Torah's goal throughout the book of Leviticus, which is the backdrop of all these laws, is to encourage us to be sensitive to the challenges of each changing moment, providing guidelines that can help us to cultivate sensitivity on multiple levels and stay connected to the spiritual dimension of existence, learning to become and stay sensitive, not just to other people, but also to one's environment and to all creatures and to the nuances of time and place, and most importantly, to our ever-changing, ever-challenging selves. Now, with the exception of the first 8 verses of our portion of Tazria, the majority of our Torah portion, the entirety of chapter 13's 59 verses, focuses on the remarkable affliction known as tzarat, which carries on into next week's portion of Mitzorah, and which we shall discuss next week with God's help. But now, after our examination of the concepts of language and sensitivity, and the spiritual dimensions and implications of the Tuma tahara dichotomy, let's return to the opening of our portion, which details the process of Tuma, the new mother's separation from her husband and from the sanctuary, and her subsequent tahara, her reinstatement after having given birth. And so we ask the question, if, as we have learned, tahara and Tuma are not issues of impurity, but of sensitivity, why should the experience of bringing new life into the world, itself the greatest imitation of godliness, a true brush with the divine, why should this render a woman tameh? So open up your heart deeper than ever. Earlier this year, in our study of Parashat Shemot, beginning the book of Exodus, we shared our sages' teaching that before birth, when an infant is yet in its mother's womb, the child is on a very high level, described by the sages as having a candle that burns over its head, and by the light of this candle it sees from one end of the world to the other, and an angel teaches it Torah, which it forgets at the moment of birth. We discussed how the concept of this candle and the unlimited vision of the child and its high level of intuitive spiritual knowledge all reflect the idea that prior to birth, the unborn child in the womb is on the highest pre-sin spiritual level of Adam in the Garden of Eden, before having eaten from the tree of knowledge. Because the soul that the mother is carrying is on that Edenic level, she is also on an exalted level. She's been carrying this very high soul for 9 months, and that close connection has had a profound effect on her, impacting her relationship with Hashem and with the world. And now that soul is leaving her stewardship, as it were. She'll always be connected in the deepest way to her child, but in a sense, the birth, for which she is so joyous and thankful, on one level actually diminishes her, in that now she's losing that special soul connection that she was carrying within her. So there is a certain turmoil, because she was 2 and now she's 1. There was like a divine presence enveloping her, which departs at birth, and so now she has a lacking. A vacuum is created where there had been a high concentration of holiness. And the sages teach that wherever such a vacuum is created, there's a force of negative energy that moves in. So she's left with a void as well, and now she needs to realign herself. And the prescribed period of Tuma for a female child is longer than that of the male child, twice as long, because the mother requires a longer period of recovery and adjustment, since the birth of a female child has a greater spiritual impact on her than the birth of a male child. The mother sees in her daughter the continuation of her own self, the transmission of her own spiritual and moral values to the next generation. And thus the female child is so much more a replica of the divine image for her that her loss is twice as great, her feeling of emptiness twice as strong. And as always, there are so many levels of meaning, and this is just one. Torah always aims for our lives to be filled with constant and refreshing and renewing rendezvous with God. We live our lives in a delicate balancing act, poised between the material and the spiritual, and we're constantly challenged to stay focused on the real priorities of life, especially because our vision is blurred and clouded by the gravitational pull of the material, which amounts to nothing more than illusion and fantasy. So on the one hand, we live in a material world, and our very existence is dependent on our clinging to the physical. On the other hand, man needs spiritual checks and balances that emanate from the realm of holiness, that resonate with his godly soul in order to refine his humanity. By Hashem's infinite wisdom, the Torah's divinely designed concepts of Tuma and Tahara places the goal of maintaining this balance within reach. We live between these lines of demarcation, and the substance of our material existence, guided by our spiritual aspirations, directs us to sanctify the materialism of our lives through our behavior and to constantly strive for a higher level of connection, meaning, and purpose. Thank you for watching this week's Jerusalem Lights Torah portion. If you enjoy these videos, please subscribe to our channel and share with others. And please consider supporting these efforts to share Torah with everyone. Shabbat Shalom.